Hey everybody, today is Monday, December 5th, 2022. Coming up on the show today, from Glass Onion and Knives Out Mystery, editor Bob Ducsay.
I think over the course of making a film, and look, this is true of all movies. If you're really connected and every little detail becomes important, I think you make a better film. I try to be tremendously thorough with the first cut of the movie. But then on top of that, on location, you have to work with great speed. Speed and thorough are hard to do. The audience just has a certain clock, and they're with you if you're entertaining them. But they do have a clock, and the clock is like, okay, when's the murder?
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. All right, I can't believe it's Monday again already. What happened to the weekend? No matter. Most of us are not too thrilled about Monday, I get that. But when it comes to talking to today's guest, Monday could not come soon enough. For me, anyway. I know I always say this because it's always true, but I got a fun one for you today. One I have been looking forward to for a while, and someone I always look forward to speaking with. So let's get right to it. Today we are featuring Rian Johnson's follow-up to his 2019 whodunit movie, Knives Out. This one's called Glass Onion and Knives Out Mystery. You see, it's a franchise now. That's when you know you have a hit, when they want to make a franchise out of it. And yes, that means there's already at least one more Knives Out mystery movie to come. But we will get to that one when we get to that one. Today we are all about Glass Onion and Ryan's right-hand man in the editing room. Well, I guess it would be both hands, right? You can edit with one hand, but using both definitely makes it easier. And those talented hands belong to editor Bob Ducsay. I love Bob. I love talking to Bob. I always learn something speaking with Bob. And I know you will too. Glass Onion, which had a brief Thanksgiving holiday run at the movie theater, will be streaming on Netflix in a few weeks. So if you didn't make it out to the theater, don't sweat it, you can catch it on Netflix. But if you were able to see it in the theater, you were able to drink in all the sumptuous imagery of Greece where the film takes place. It'll still be sumptuous on your TV, but the theater experience definitely makes the most of that. Aside from being great to look at, the film is what you'd expect from a follow-up to Knives Out, which is a clever, funny, entertaining whodunit in the spirit of Agatha Christie movies like Evil Under the Sun. Glass Onion, I believe, is the fourth film that Bob has done with Rian Johnson, which honestly surprised me. I felt like it would have been more than that. They first worked together on Looper, which came out in 2012, and, of course, Star Wars The Last Jedi, and then you have the two Knives Out movies. That's four. Even I can count that high. Suffice to say, Bob and Rian have established quite a filmmaking bond over that time. So much so that they recently were given the inaugural, that means the first one, Variety Creative Collaborators Award in celebration of their work together. Variety Collaborate, that's a lot to say. Maybe we'll ask Bob about that. But we certainly have a lot of other things to ask him, and we will get right to that after a few nice words about our benevolent sponsor, Extreme Music. My friends, it is no mystery who intelligent storytellers turn to when they need the very best in production audio. Why, of course, it's Extreme Music and their legendary roster of A-list musicians and composers, all gathered together to provide you with a vast catalog of top-shelf tracks. Tracks that you can search through using metadata like lyrics, tempo, genre, composer. It's almost like a game of Clue. You could say, Extreme Music, I think the murderer was Hans Zimmer in the recording booth with the glockenspiel. Well, maybe not quite like that, but they make it so easy to find just what you're looking for. You can even give them a clue by uploading a reference track so they can find you other suspects just like it. You can get it all done right there on their website or get a little help from one of their reps at an office near you. And that is especially helpful when you get down to the business of working out the licensing. But it is absolutely free to try, and I think, lots of fun to do. So do not wait, my friends. The next time you have a mystery to solve in your audio tracks, track down the good folks at Extreme Music. All right, everybody, grab a seat. Editor Bob Ducsay is here to disclose just how he did it on Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery. And I love talking to you. And when people ask me, like, why do you love talking to Bob Ducsay? And you know they do. I tell them Bob always takes it to another level that I hadn't considered and finds some truth in things that I hadn't looked at before.
First of all, thanks for talking to me. I really appreciate it. I can never live up to that intro, and I say that in all seriousness.
So I told myself when I went to see Glass Onion, I said, the first thing that I see, I'm going to find a question about that to ask Bob. The film begins over black, like many films do. And it's something I never really gave any consideration regarding the reasoning behind it. But after watching your film, I thought maybe I should. Is there anything you're trying to do or say to the audience with this approach? I mean, being a mystery, is it a technique for creating unease or uncertainty in the audience? Or is it simply a matter of that's what Rian had in the script?
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool the way the movie opens. I wish I could say that I knew exactly the reason for it. And like so many things in editorial and in filmmaking, we do so many things that are completely reasoned and thought out, but some things just happen and it just feels like it's the right thing to do. And I think that was kind of how it worked here. I mean, the opening image of the film was always designed to be that door knock. And coming out of black just seemed like the way to do it. And although one thing that's interesting, of course, is that it gets rhymed later in the movie when we kind of reset and go backwards in time to show the audience some of what was happening was not what they thought it was, actually kind of something very significant. It works very much the same way with the same music, somebody knocking on a door, coming out of black. And it works rather beautifully. And the reason that it worked out so well is because that big reset was slightly problematic for some portion of the audience when we were first showing the movie. They eventually caught up with what had happened there, but it's such a dramatic change and a reset that there were some audience members that took them a little while to catch up. And instead of thinking about the movie, they were thinking about where are they and when are they. So by reprising the opening of the movie, the hope was that the audience would understand that they've gone back in time.
Well, that reset, I mean, that's something I think we're going to revisit quite a bit. And I know we talked about it last time with Knives Out because it's such a fascinating component, this double narrative thing that you have to do. But let's get back to the first Knives Out. Back in 2019, Rian had hinted at the possibility of a sequel. When did he, in the course of your relationship, tell you that, hey, I'm thinking it would be great to do another one? And what did he say about where he wanted to take what would eventually become a franchise?
Well, I think in Ryan's mind, he always hoped that it could be a series of films. But I mean, look, when you set out to make a movie, what you have to just pray for is that you actually make a good film. And so you don't want to really get ahead of things and think that this is going to be something beyond one film. But I know that, he hoped he had it, he had hoped that the movie would be enjoyed by enough people that he could continue making more adventures with Benoit Blanc. So it was really early in the process that I think that this was in his head. But again, I think we're all like, when you're making the movie, you're really just trying to make one good film, and maybe you'll luck out and people will like it and you'll get to make more. And then the reaction to the first film was really great. Taking it out just a preview, the audience really seemed to love it. And then the paying audience responded really well to the film. And, at that point, because everybody had a great time making the movie, Daniel Craig really enjoyed the character, we knew we were going to make another film when the first one performed so well. And so Ryan's hope, and all of our hope, because we had such a great time making the film, was that we would, be able to go on another adventure with Benoit.
I asked you about where could we take this Knives Out franchise. What about where Rian might have wanted to take, or even Daniel Craig wanted to take, the character of Benoit Blanc? It feels like we get to know him a little better this time, and we get to spend more time with him on this one.
I think that that's absolutely true. And I think that, that's intentional, so that you layer in a little bit more detail about who this guy is, where he lives, what his home life is like. But, Rian talks about this a lot. He thinks it's really important in these murder mystery films, just in general, for the detective to remain kind of how you see him, because the big change and the thing that's most interesting to him is the new murder mystery and a new set of despicable suspects. And I would expect that with each successive film, hopefully we know we're going to make at least one more, but hopefully we'll get to make more than that if the audience continues to enjoy the films and we continue to do our jobs at a good enough level. I think you will learn more about Benoit. That would be my expectation. But I don't think there's ever going to be one of these films where we find out all this, there's going to be all this backstory and the film is going to be about Benoit Blanc as a person, because I think there's so much going on in the murder mystery genre that the detective has a function. And of course, it's the most important function. And Daniel's character is so incredibly vivid and awesome. He's not really lacking for backstory. I mean, and the truth of it is, I mean, if you think of it, not that they really relate in the type of character, but if you think of a character like Indiana Jones, he doesn't really have a lot of backstory, you know? I mean, you do continue to learn things in subsequent films, obviously, but it's about going on the adventure with an archaeologist, and in the case of the Knives Out movies, you know, a detective. So I think that we'll continue to learn some things about him, but I would be surprised if there was a film that was completely focused on the detective.
Well, I know that you demur from accepting any kind of praise that I give you, but that's just too bad because you have taught me a lot about editing, either directly or indirectly. And one of the things I first learned from you was not even talking to you, was listening to the commentary track on The Mummy, a movie you know that I love and a lot of people love. You were talking with Steve about the notes you gave him on the script.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that was my introduction to the fact that the editor really has a strong voice in advising the director on certain story points.
Yeah.
Same thing here with Rian. When you sat down with him and you looked at the script, what things stood out to you as things you wanted to discuss with him and refine or punch up or work on?
When you have a collaboration and the director-editor collaboration is pretty intimate and focused, the thing about the job is it's delivering the story, right? And the characters. And, you know, this is what movies are about. And so much of what informs whether a movie is successful or not is in the screenplay. I mean, it's massive. It's sort of unimaginable that you could make a great movie from a bad screenplay. But if you have a great screenplay, you know, unless you really mess it up, you're assured of having some level of goodness. You know, you're assured of having some level of quality. And Rian is a really clever, intelligent, talented writer. And so we start with an enormous template, for lack of a better word. But like with all screenplays in their early stages, there are always some issues. You know, it might be that a character isn't tracking or isn't developed. And this is particularly an issue in this kind of ensemble movie where, you know, it's really important that the characters be vivid and interesting to the audience. And they also have to be kind of balanced, even though some characters, you know, are by their very nature more important than others in the film, but you don't want to short shrift any character. So usually the notes with Rian are along those lines. But there are also sometimes structural things, things that aren't particularly clear that you know, with experience, you know, you can anticipate being a problem when the movie is made. I mean, every once in a while, I'll be asked to go look at a movie that's having some difficulties in post-production. And one of the things that I always ask is for the screenplay before I go in and watch the movie to see if there's anything that I could suggest or help with. I mean, 9 times out of 10, you read the screenplay and you go, well, I bet when I go see this, this is a problem, and this is a problem, and this is a problem. And, you know, and it's usually the case because, you know, the defects were built in when you went out the door to go make the movie. So there's enormous advantage to getting everything right in the screenplay. And it's impossible to get everything right, but you want to do the best that you can because certain things that get built in just aren't fixable unless you do something really massive in the way of reshooting. So you want to try to avoid those. I mean, I'd say, I've done 4 movies and a couple of, you know, Ryan's got a new show on Peacock called Poker Face. I've done did a couple of episodes that he directed. So after all of this stuff, you know, 4 features and those 2 episodes, there's not been any sort of gigantic problem with any of the screenplays, even in the earliest stages. But that doesn't mean that there's not contribution that can be made that's going to just sort of save you from, you know, a bit of pain in post-production trying to figure out something that wasn't working as well in the screenplay stage as you'd want it to. And I think all writers, all writer directors, they have a group of people that help them in the early stages reading the screenplay and giving notes. And I think this isn't specific to me, but in director-editor relationships that are close, like I believe that Ryan and mine is, I think it's particularly helpful because, you know, you have all the knowledge of working with that person and, you know, trying to avoid some pitfalls before you start shooting is definitely worthwhile. Anyway, bottom line is screenplay. You know what I mean? It's the secret to success, and it's so easy to say and so hard to execute.
Aside from writing a great screenplay, he picked a great locale. You shot it in Greece on an island. Ryan described making the film as a summer vacation where we also made a movie. Was that sort of the vibe when you were there?
Well, all I can really say is what an unbelievable opportunity for me to go from a dark cutting room in Los Angeles to a dark cutting room in Greece. The experiences, I'm joking, of course, but look, we shot the first movie in your neck of the woods in the winter, and it was cold and snowy.
I'm sorry.
No. It's okay. I mean, because it is what the movie needed, and the movie looked beautiful, and I've certainly done that. But, if you had to choose, cold and snowy or the Aegean Sea, I should have said the Ionian Sea. It's fantastic. I mean, obviously. And one of the things that's interesting, and I think this is, true of most movies, really many movies, but Ron Bergman, Ryan's producing partner, and Ryan have a real focus on post-production and editorial. And they think that it's kind of essential for the editor to be on location. And I completely agree with that, because one of the things that you're really trying to do, I find it absolutely the most stressful and difficult, oppressively difficult sometimes part of the process, because I try to be tremendously thorough with the first cut of the movie. But then on top of that, on location, you have to work with great speed. So speed and thorough are hard to do, which just means, a lot more hours and stress. And everybody goes through this, of course. But, we put a particular focus on trying to provide guidance while the movie's being photographed so that Ryan can come in and see how things are progressing. And we can talk about if we need to go left a few degrees or right a few degrees, or, this character has to be, a little bit more like this or a little bit like that. But also, if there's anything in coverage that we're missing, or some story point that is maybe seemed strong on the page, but is a little more diffuse when it's been photographed. And the goal is, while being in a beautiful place like Greece, is to somehow come out of the shoot with little to no additional photography needed. And it's tricky because every part of the process is there's the script. There's that movie, and then there's the one you're shooting. There's that movie, and then there's the one in post. Well, the version in post is the one that goes out into the theaters, and it's really, really hard to be able to anticipate everything. But we try very, very hard to interact with all the departments and make sure that everybody is getting all of the guidance and help that they can by providing material cut material, and hopefully come out of the process without needing any photography, which we've been quite good at on most of the films with very little to do. I mean, both Glass Onion and Knives Out didn't have any additional photography. And Looper had a day, and Last Jedi, I think, had 4 days. So we've done really well to do that. But, I mean, is it better to do that in Greece than it is sitting in Los Angeles? Well, sure. I mean, it's exotic and fun, and you're there. Although, this movie was made during, I think it was the Delta. When we were in Greece, it was pretty bad there. And so it wasn't as much fun as it might be, without the pandemic. So between work and that, but still, I mean, Ryan talks about this, having made the last movie in cold weather. I mean, how do we end up in this location? Well, I mean, it's a reaction. Maybe the next movie will take place in Antarctica as a reaction to Greece. Other thing I would mention, I mean, not to get into the weeds too much on location, but we did all the location work in Greece, but then we moved north to Serbia and Belgrade, where we did the stage work for the film. So the whole movie was made in Europe, but essentially in two different locales.
Well, another thing that I recall from previous talks with you, and maybe I'm recollecting this wrong, is that you have a pretty Spartan approach to how you set up your Avid interface, how you set up your editing environment. You don't color code a lot of stuff in terms of the tracks, and also on your desk, it's just, I got the script and I've got my notebook.
I spend more time in that room than I do in my home or anywhere else. So, because of that, I mean, really, it doesn't make any difference where we are. The cutting room always looks the same. A lot of little things that I like to do that make it feel like a warm, and sometimes they're windowless. Most times they're windowless, but it isn't a dank, sad environment. It's always actually like a really upbeat environment. And I find that to be really important just for me mentally, because I spend so much time there, to have a place that feels a little bit like home, whether you're in Greece and Prague or China, Los Angeles, wherever you happen to be, that there's a familiarity to it. And I have people say this often. They walk in the cutting room and, maybe it's somebody that, I haven't seen, for 5 years or 6 years on the last movie we worked together. And no matter where we are, the room kind of looks the same. And that's quite intentional. And it's really just for me to have as warm an environment as possible, because I think it's really, really important, because these jobs are so hard, not mine in particular, but anyone who does this, because of the hours and the attention to detail and all that. I think it's really important to have a fun environment, to have a crew that understands that, we all should be enjoying our job and we should all be having a good time, no matter how difficult it is, and find time to enjoy each other's company. Because again, these are sort of vocational jobs in the movie business, and you spend so much time doing them that I think it's really important to have a positive, good environment. And I've tried to do that over the years. So I don't know if that's really answered your question, but it sounds like it might be.
I mean, you could go into a little more if you wanted to about your setup.
Yes, right. Oh, you want to know about, right, exactly. Well, that stays the same too. I mean, over the years, I've sort of collected a little bit more. It's a little bit more elaborate. I use 4 displays. I put the script on one, and as you mentioned, my timeline and everything is extremely simplistic. I don't color code. I mean, the crew does. Sam, my first assistant, he's got all of it, but I have that all set up, so I'm not seeing any of that. Obviously, I keep dupe detection on to pay attention to things like that. But the thing is, it's very simplistic. I think I cut pretty fast on the Avid, but I'm not a power user. I started cutting on film, and I dreamt of something like nonlinear. I actually cut movies when I first started working. I so didn't want to cut on film that I actually cut several low-budget movies on the Edit Droid, which was a Lucasfilm setup that was sort of nonlinear. It used Laserdisc. And I remember a buddy of mine, James Brewer, he was an assistant on LA Law, and he said, "Hey, you got to come over here and check out what we're using this season. It's called an Avid." And I went over there and I was like, this is it. This is what I've been thinking. And so immediately I did a low budget movie, not long after that. And the Avid was extremely expensive to use in the early days. And so it was really hard to convince them to let us use it. And things were so different then too, because there wasn't shared media, and my assistant had to share the system with me because we couldn't afford 2 of them, and it was nuts. But the thing is, I was like, "Yeah, this is it. I never want to go and cut on film, even though I'm nostalgic for film because that's what I started working with, and I cut on a Moviola, and then after the first cut, you'd cut on a cam, and probably nobody knows what these things are, but I think they're absolutely. It was great fun, and but mainly what I think is because most of the films that I did when I was cutting on film, were early in my career. And so they were relatively small. It's just unimaginable to me thinking about, what it meant to cut, I don't know, The Fugitive on film or Top Gun on film. It's Apocalypse Now, right? I mean, just extraordinary that these, unbelievably talented editors not only did such brilliant work on films, all these films, right? But they also managed to do it, by mechanically cutting pieces of work picture together. It's amazing. I mean, and I did that, and I feel some nostalgia for it, but not that much. I was ready to move on the second that that I knew anything about nonlinear, because it's just better. But by the way, I will say this. I love it, love it, love it. Couldn't love it more. It's fantastic. Would never, ever want to cut a movie on film. But I don't think movies are better because we cut films electronically. I mean, obviously, those films that I just named, they would not be better if they were cut nonlinear. And so, that's an important point. But like for me, the way that I like to work, I think sound is really incredibly important, and it's integrated into my process in a big way. We cut 5:1. I like to think, I try not for much like the editing system for the whole process to not be as linear as it often is laid out. If you can get the soundtrack going and you can get the music going at an early stage, Brian's composer, Nathan Johnson, he goes to location and he'll hang out with us for, a couple of months. And that's another example of something that I really believe in and that I love. I mean, if you have the wherewithal to do such a thing, that the process of making the movie becomes less linear and you can get processes going earlier. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think about heroes of mine like Walter Murch as an example. And I mean, it's much, much more complicated than the sorts of films he was doing, and especially before nonlinear. But the idea of interacting with the sound department while you're cutting the movie. And I've had many opportunities to do that. Again, it does require spending some additional money that some people are not up for doing, which is fine. But, we do it ourselves then if we can't do that. But if you can interact with the sound designer, the sound supervisor while you're putting the movie together and send cut sequences back with their tracks and get that stuff back. I mean, it's really quite powerful because when you cut on film, you could maybe put one music track that you would fade up and down, as you ran the reel. But you couldn't integrate the sound. I mean, there's one track. There's a guide track that you're cutting that's the dialogue. And if you have overlaps, you can't even present those unless you send them out to the sound department and have them make it for you because you have one way, one single track. And so that process, I mean, obviously it works. We said, movies aren't better now because we cut this way. But for me, being able to integrate that part of it, the sound, and I mean, everything else, visual effects, I mean, it's extraordinary. So kudos to you guys for, providing a technology that really, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, but it makes my life better. Oh, well, right. So I sort of got off track on that. But the thing is, the way I use the machine, I went off on talking about film for a particular reason. The reason that I was mentioning that is that many of the techniques that I use in cutting on film, I still do on the Avid. But I'm quick at that because the Avid lets me be quick at that. And so I'm very, it's very, very straightforward when it comes to how I actually edit. I use, although on the other hand, I'm a big timeline editor, and obviously that's not something that is, there's any relationship to in cutting the movie on film. I mean, there's none whatsoever. But I do like timeline editing a great deal. It's extremely powerful, and it's something that my brain really understands.
Well, it doesn't matter if you're cutting on film or you're cutting digitally. The challenge in any movie, certainly in a whodunit like this, is establishing all these characters and getting the plot off on the right foot. You and Ryan do it in a really fun way with introducing this disparate group of characters. You have a model, a YouTuber, a scientist, politician. You can't see how any of these people could be connected to each other.
Right.
And you don't explain that. You see them get this mysterious invitation that comes in the form of a puzzle they have to solve. So tell me about building that open and reworking it so that it felt right and that it sucked the audience in without giving them too much.
Well, like I said earlier, it all starts with the screenplay. And in both this film and in Knives Out, Ryan had very clever ways in both movies to introduce our ensemble cast. So it starts with the script, how it works structurally. And then as the movie is put together, you try to continue with the goals of the screenplay, which is to be extremely efficient so that we can, get the party started. And you want to know, who are we going to go on this adventure with? Who are these people? In the first film, it's the Thrombey family. And in this film, it's this group of disruptors. And it's interesting that you mentioned, we don't really know exactly why these people are together. And in fact, deeper in the film, and what's called the disruptor scene, which is a scene out in front of the pool house where all the characters are gathered together, Benoit notes, he said, you all are such different people. What brought you all together, right? And that's where we understand. But what you have to do as a screenwriter, and then subsequently in the making of the movie, is that you have to make that opening sequence entertaining and intriguing, and keep it moving so that the audience isn't thinking, why are these people together? What you want out of it, I think, is you want to, when you get to the end of that sequence, you want to say, I'm excited to go on an adventure with these people because they seem like a bunch of fun people. And I think the movie does that pretty well. And I think actually both do. But in Glass Onion, what was particularly fun about it is that integrated with, because in the first film, it's basically an interview. And, we're meeting everyone through the interview of the police with Benoit as an observer. In this film, we're meeting everyone with a mysterious puzzle, and they're all putting it together. And so one of the things that came out of that, having all these people on the phone, and this is scripted, that there would be split screens. And the split screens are, kind of an old timey technique. It's pretty popular for a period of time, but it's a very clever technique because it allows you to put multiple people in the same frame that are in disparate locations, all interacting with one another, in a way that like a phone call can't, right? Or any other technique. So we get to see all these people who are separated by distance, by location, all together in the same frame. And the split screens were super fun to do. They're, I think, pretty cleverly done. And, they create a complication. There's no question about it because sometimes things have to change a little bit from what was originally planned. And then I think the other challenge that was true of both films in the introduction is that you needed to be efficient because the audience just has a certain clock and they're with you if you're entertaining them. And I think that those scenes are both very entertaining and the characters are quite vivid. But they do have a clock, and the clock is like, okay, when's the murder, right? And so you have to be super efficient in those sequences. And I think that that's one of the challenges of both of those sequences, both in the original writing and then in the editorial, to make sure that the audience is delighted and entertained and is being fed both information that they need for the story and also building characters that hopefully they're going to enjoy the rest of the movie.
Something I noticed I thought was a little different is the split screens were done as triangles.
Yeah, interestingly enough, there were some of what you see there were things that Rian had in mind. But I have this, incredible visual effects editor who, I've worked with on a couple of shows now and is a really important creative person on our team. His name is Vaughn Bean. Vaughn started experimenting with different shapes as we were putting the sequence together. And a lot of those really, because there's a lot of, it's a little bit, they're not so structured because of the angles. And I think there's a little bit of tension in that. And I just love it visually. And, all credit to him for making those shapes and designs so artful. He did a really great job on that.
Definitely. And like I said, I think there's so much psychology that goes on in what you do as well as the story as a whole. The subtle thing like changing the shape of a split screen can increase tension, increase unease, like I was talking about with the over the black part.
Yeah. And I think it's really effective in that way because, the scene is also funny too, but something is up. I mean, because you see the relationships between these people and they seem like they're friends, but there seems like a lot of tension between them. The influence of graphics and typography. I mean, it's all subconscious things, but you have to try to really work on both the macro and the micro when you're making a movie. And, there's a million things, Ryan's super clever when it comes to these things and everybody gets on board, every department gets on board. He's such a great collaborator and encourages everyone to do their best work and provides a really safe environment for people to come up with things and pitch things. And so everybody gets on board so that there's so many little details in the film that the audience doesn't necessarily see. But what I think is, I think it makes everyone working on the movie just more engaged. So I think over the course of making a film, and look, this is true of all movies. If you're really connected and every little detail becomes important, I think you make a better film.
Absolutely. And then you made it very clear at the beginning that it all starts with the screenplay. It's impossible to make a good film out of a bad screenplay. Something else I hear often from editors is the importance of the casting. You have a great screenplay and the film is not cast well. It's just almost impossible for the editor to get around that. You have a fantastic cast here, a big cast here. And you talked earlier a little bit about just sort of balancing all these different players. Obviously, you're first and foremost, you're serving the story. It's all about serving the story. But do you track or do you pay attention to? Do you even use any sort of methods for just sort of looking at the timeline and going, wow, I really haven't, things are a little out of kilter, or I'm not getting enough of this one character?
Absolutely. I wouldn't say, with an ensemble cast, it's a big responsibility and one which, you have, for obvious reasons, an enormous amount of impact when you're cutting a movie because, where you focus, it's everything you do is about focus, right? And point of view. It's a little bit like making this like really great meal. And you have all these different flavors because not only are the characters different, but all the actors are different. They all bring all kinds of great stuff. And some are a little hot, some are a little spicy, some are a little, whatever. And you're always trying to have the right balance. And the right balance doesn't mean smooth. It just means giving everyone their due and making sure that, the meal is great, that you don't have too much or too little of somebody. And that's absolutely something that happens. And I could just, personally, having done this a really long time, the thing that I love the absolute most about editing is character work, because I love actors, and what they do is absolutely magical. It's hard to understand how, because, it's all about like sort of inner light and being honest, and somehow bringing that to the screen is to me, it's just absolutely magical. And so to be able to work with all the fine actors that we had in this film, to me, is just, every day was Christmas when the dailies would come in. It's like, oh, what's Birdie doing today? What's Claire doing? Oh, Miles, you rascal, what'd you do now? Right. And all this stuff comes in, and you just, you get in there, and the tiniest of details matter. And I think it's one of the reasons that I enjoy it so much, because, you take this great material that these fine artists have delivered, and now the goal is to shape it for the whole, the movie, not just an individual character. And I really love that about it. And I love how you can affect change by dropping a line or making something, a silent reaction instead of the dialogue. And, you take 8 frames off something, and it changes how you feel about it. And any single thing you do, sometimes they're important, but it's not that. It's the whole. So, when I'm first putting a movie together, right, and I've based because I've read the screenplay and I know what the intent of the actor is, and you get the early days of dailies, and you're still trying to figure it out, and the actors are still trying to figure it out. But there's a point in the process, I think even while they're shooting, that I'll think, oh, that's not how Andi would say that. And it becomes so much more fun because these people. And I don't mean the actors themselves, but the characters. You know them so well that I just think it's exciting to shape the character over the course of the film. And again, with the goal of servicing the movie as a whole, not one particular person or not one particular scene. It's so detail oriented, and also is so much about judgment and taste, that I find it very exciting, as well as, endlessly challenging, because I think like my skill with this, at whatever level it is so much better than it was when I started out. I mean, and obviously it should be, given, that I've done this 30 years or whatever. But every movie I do, I grow much more interested in character. You have all the other things that you have to service. So, I mean, it doesn't really, if you're in an action movie, you have the action, and if you have the story that you have to tell. And it's not like any of these things is more important than the other, but just from a personal standpoint, what I love doing, it's all about that. And when you've got great actors like we did in this movie, it's really just quite something.
Well, I'm going to extend your meal analogy and say, as far as the leads, you have great entrees, but you also have great side dishes. Other than the leads, you have this fantastic Zoom call scene with, talk about disparate group of characters, Angela Lansbury, Stephen Sondheim, Natasha Lyonne, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. There's a lot of scenes I could ask you about putting that together and how did that all work, but I'm kind of curious about that one in particular.
Well, I mean, it was amazing to do. And what I love so much about the casting of that scene, and again, it kind of goes back to casting, is that they all seem like they would know Benoit. And it's funny that they're friends. So sometimes cameos can be a little bit disruptive because they're a surprise, and they're like a little jolt when you're in the world, and then suddenly there's this extra idea. But tons of fun. The whole movie, from tops to tails, every day was a pleasure.
I want to go back to something you said a minute ago about how, as you're working through this, the actors are figuring out who their characters are and finding the intent of the screenplay. Mm-hmm. Because of that, is it safe to assume that the performances you end up going with are later in the run, that they're later takes, or do you even start looking at the most recent take first?
Well, I mean, I think especially when it comes to performance, it's endlessly necessary to be thorough with the material. And I get notes back from the set, obviously, things that Rian thought, this take seems to be working really well, that sort of thing. But I think it's absolutely necessary to be thorough. So, And it varies. It varies. You end up using material from early takes and late takes. There's no question about it. But there is sometimes with some actors, right? I mean, this isn't a surprise to anyone who's done this. Some actors are really great in the first take or two and then sort of drop off some. And then the opposite is true, I should say, of other actors. So you get this mix of, especially in an ensemble movie, you get this mix of techniques. Some people need to warm up. Some people start hot, and again, it's fun, and you can track that over time. You go, here would be my expectation of where I'm going to get something good from this actor versus this actor. And over the course of making the movie, sometimes it's almost like clockwork, that expectation. But there is truth to the fact that it's not like Rian is a passive participant on the set, especially early on when everybody's figuring everything out. He's in there giving direction. And so I would say often, to really answer your question, in the early days of making the movie, the later takes are used more predominantly than the earlier takes because of that very reason, because everybody's sort of tuning up and finding their way.
Earlier, you described yourself, you said, I'm a timeline editor. And in the case of Glass Onion, you're actually a two-timeline editor. I mean, you have this double narrative. You have what is presented to the audience at first blush.
Yes.
But then you also have the reveal, and in going back and explaining, as Benoit explains what really went down, you have this other story to lay out. How do you approach doing that? Is it really, do you go back and use takes from the same scene, or are things shot specifically for, okay, now this is the reveal piece? How does that work?
Well, I mean, as you can imagine, I mean, it's a combination of both. So the movie does a big reset at one point where the audience learns something radically new by going back in time. And so what that means is we then head back toward where we doubled back on a new, it is a new timeline, but it's not like this is a time travel movie, but it's a new timeline in that we're now seeing things from another point of view. Point of view is an enormous part of storytelling and cinema in particular, and absolutely specifically to editing. And so we now see things from a different point of view. So some things are specifically photographed with the new point of view. So it does add a complication because you can obviously use material from the old point of view where it makes sense. And that is something that happens. So it's a combination of things. But one of the things that Rian and I talked about a lot while we were editing the movie was that we wanted to be absolutely as honest with the audience as possible. Meaning that if you were to go back and watch the movie a second time, you would see an enormous number of clues and details that are there in plain sight. We're not lying to you. You actually got to see them. But what we know, like in a good magic trick, we know where the audience is looking and we know what they're thinking about. And they don't have the context to understand that this is information that they could really use if they knew that they should pay attention to it. And so we worked endlessly hard to push the limits of that. But if you were to see the movie and then go back and see it a second time, there are things that are just blatant, that there's obviously something amiss. And I think that you need to be honest with the audience so that if they were to watch the movie a second time, or if just sort of think back on it, they don't think that they've been duped by the filmmakers. They hopefully will be delighted by the fact that that stuff was there in plain sight. And so that was a gigantic goal and a big complication of any murder mystery. And I think in particular, Rian's movies, because, he goes out of his way to add structural complexity. And what's great about the structural complexity is that it leads to delight.
Before I let you go, I did want to just sort of close out one more time about your working relationship with Rian. When I went back to prep for this, I was surprised that you had only done 4 films together. It really felt like you've been working together your whole career. And so I'd just like to know, even in the short amount of time, and 10 years really isn't that long in the lifespan of filmmaking, how your collaborative relationship has evolved.
First, I want to mention, and I don't know if I ever talked to you about this before, but the movie business is a funny thing, right? I mean, how things happen, how relationships happen. I had gone to see a movie that needed some work, and they were looking for someone to come in and do some additional work on the film. And it was a movie that Ryan's partner, Ron Bergman, produced. And I went in, I saw the film, and I met with the studio, and I met with Rom, and spent a few hours talking to him about it and the studio guys. But I didn't get the job. I didn't get the job to come in and work on it. And then a couple of years later, Rom called my agent and said, "Hey, I'd like Bob, if he's interested, to meet Ryan to edit this movie we're going to make called Looper." So he just remembered me, right? He just remembered me for whatever reason and thought it might be a good fit, which is a little bit, related to your question. So I went and I met Ryan, and we had lunch together, and I think we hit it off pretty well. And I ended up getting the job and then did Looper. So this kind of like nothing job interview that I didn't get the job turned into this decade-long relationship with Ryan. I mean, there's just everything is like, do you go left or do you go right when you're working in a movie? It's like in the movie business, it's the tiniest things make something happen or don't. And this is a perfect example of that. That Rom, who's known, Ryan forever and has been his partner forever, had the instinct that Ryan and I would be a good fit, and we are. And I think that's kind of amazing, because it just seems like sort of random almost how I got hooked up with him. And when we started working together, Ryan had either edited or co-edited his first two films. So he had never really had the relationship of having an editor collaborator in the same way, that most of the people that I've worked with had. And so I think it was maybe a little bit difficult for him to start, because, it's sort of like you put two micromanagers in a room together and you go, okay, go, But it worked pretty well, actually. I mean, it worked pretty darn well on the very first movie that we did together. And I guess well enough that, he asked me back on Last Jedi and then all the subsequent stuff. And I think that what's interesting to me, but also not surprising, is everything started pretty well. Like we had a good time making Looper. The movie turned out well. It was financially successful. We enjoyed working together. But what's happened over the decade plus that we've worked together is the collaboration has become sort of finer and finer. He understands what I can bring to the process, what I can do. And I put an enormous amount of effort. I mean, and I do this on every film, but, with Ryan and I, it just particularly clicks that I am there to deliver the director's vision, right? And the movie is the thing. It doesn't matter how we get there. What matters is that we're all on the same page. And all of Ryan's collaborators, his cameraman, Steve Yedlin, he's worked together since film school. And all of the people that he works with, this is the relationship, because he is very open to people providing real work and real additions to his vision and to his point of view. But we're all there to bring his ideas to the screen. And I embrace that because I think that that's the right relationship. But at the same time, if all I was doing was trying to guess what it was that he wanted, I wouldn't be bringing much value to it. And I think that over the years, as you learn to trust someone more, and I mean this both ways, it just becomes second nature. And you just feel like you have someone there who's watching your back. And I feel that way about Ryan. And I think he feels that way about me as we continue to work together. And I just think it's it just gets better with every single film that we do. And I feel very, very fortunate to work with him, because I genuinely love all the films we've made together. And he's incredibly clever. He's a great writer. He's really funny, and he's a great guy. He's just great to work with. And so I'm the luckiest person in the world, because I've got a job that I love. And I get to work with somebody like Ryan.
You have a job that you love, and I know you have a job that you need to get back to. So just since you brought up Ron Bergman, I'm going to squeeze in one more quick one. I loved your movie so much that I sat through every single frame. And that means I saw all the credits. And I have to ask you, who are Bergman's flying mules?
That's a good question. I actually don't know who that is. That's in the end credits, huh? Shows how closely I looked at that. I need to text Rom right now and find out who the fly. I mean, it sounds great. What department was that? Do you know?
I don't remember. That's a good tag, though.
I wish I had the answer to that. That would be so good. But maybe it's a little bit like the Kessel Run. We don't really want to know exactly what it was, right? I mean, it's just the name itself is so, exciting.
I can't argue with that. I can't argue with anything you said. Well, I think we can consider this mystery solved. When you want to tell a great story like Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery, you get yourself a great editor like Bob Ducsay. Always a pleasure to have Bob talk with us, and clearly he's a busy man, so I know you share my sentiment of gratitude that he took the time to speak with us. Say, I'm not sure how many days of Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or Festivus are left at the time you're listening to this, but it is never too late to give yourself, or the ones you love, the gift of great editing tools. That's a gift that keeps on giving. Avid Media Composer comes to mind, so I would not mind one bit if you checked out the link in the show notes that will take you right to the special offers page on avid.com. And with that, dear listener, once again, we have come to the end of our journey through the cutting rooms of the greatest editors in the world. I had fun. I think we should do it again. Maybe more than once even. If you feel the same way, please subscribe to The Rough Cut so you can join me on these adventures. Until the next one, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.